Hi everyone, this is a short tutorial on how to develop proficiency descriptors. We are using these across the curriculum, and every course and every student learning outcome, OBR, will be included. So in writing proficiency descriptors, each class presents its own challenges. What we want to remember is that the proficiency descriptors encompass the learning outcomes for the class. That ties to the learning outcomes for the program, which tie to the institutional core competencies. So when we developed the student learning outcomes, we described what a student can do based on Bloom's taxonomy. And we're writing those assignments so that we're sure that the student can achieve the outcome by accomplishing certain tasks. But when we write the descriptors, we're really describing how well the student does each task in the assignment. So that means that we have to break that description down to the task and the quality of achieving the task. We want to think about continuing to develop more competency-based assignments, especially for our signature assignments and our key graded assignments. The signature assignments are at the bachelor's level, the key graded assignments are at the associate's level. And when we do that, we want to think about scenario-based or project-based, task-oriented assignments whereby the student applies the learning to a real-life or real-world situation. That helps us to avoid plagiarism, and it also really calls on the student rather than just rote learning where they just spit back what's in the book. They actually have to apply that knowledge to some task. We're using the value rubrics as a baseline, and we're very cognizant of what iBoard will encompass. So we have modified some of the value rubrics, and we do have a framework to go from that will fit into iBoard, but you still have to customize it for every SLO and for every assignment. And if you want to work from the value rubrics, you're certainly welcome to. This is an example of the one for critical thinking, and you can see that if you used the benchmark, once you have described the task the student is doing, you'd have an awful lot that has to fit into iBoard. The students already have to click on an extra button to open the proficiency descriptor all the way up, so we want to try to keep it nice and tight. This is an example of the one from information literacy. And again, you can see that at the benchmark level or even at the capstone level, it would be very difficult to get all of this information into iBoard. But it is a great starting point, and these are normed rubrics. So it's if you want to use them and pull from them as opposed to the tool that we have to provide that's already kind of been scripted from these, you're welcome to do that. So our proficiency descriptors with the outcomes-based rubrics, or the OBRs, the beginning corresponds to the AACNU benchmark. Accordingly, milestones 2 and 3 become emerging and developed, and the capstone becomes highly developed in our vernacular. We already talked about it fitting into iBoard. These are the guidelines for the outcome-based rubrics, and they will be universal across the course. So every instructor, we will have inter-rater reliability when you're using these, and it will be a more normed ability to grade across different instructors and to assess the student learning across different instructors and different students. We've already gone through the mapping process by the time you get to developing the proficiency descriptors. So your student learning outcomes, SLOs, have already been mapped to the ICCs and the PLOs. But at the bottom line, you want to remember that the proficiency descriptor does two things. It describes the goals and the tasks at the module and assignment level. So it explains what the student has to do, but it also describes the degree of success with which they do that in accomplishing the task. This is an example of the ICC BPLO map for business. And we have already, the program learning outcomes have already been adjusted to conform to the Lumina degree profile for the associate's level and for the bachelor's level. And when you see this, it's also sometimes called the IRM map. And what that means is that if you're at a reinforced level, that at some previous course, the student was introduced to the concept. The concept is introduced to the student one time in their program and then reinforced multiple times across their program and then finally mastered in their program. And keeping in mind that mastery at an associate's level is going to be different than mastery at a bachelor's level, as we will all recall from mastering at our master's level and mastering it at our doctorate level. And this is the example for the APLO map from business, and you can see that the program learning outcomes, while they use the same institutional core competencies, have been adjusted somewhat to reflect the lower level that we expect that would be the difference between an associate student and a bachelor's level student. So what we really want to think of is that at the basic level, the proficiency descriptor can coach the student to success. I find it easiest to use the one-step down approach to start with the highly developed, the highest level of achievement that an A++ student would receive for that work, and then step it down from that. At the next level, you'd be discussing a low A or maybe a high B. At the emerging level, you'd be discussing a low B, maybe a C, and at the beginning level, you'd be talking about somebody who maybe a very low C or D, or even fails to achieve the assignment at all, but at least attempted the assignment. So what we want the students to be able to do is to be able to use these proficiency descriptors as a roadmap to excellence. If they look at their work and the instructor has clicked on that and the color has changed so that the student can see what they got. So let's say they got an emerging. Then they ought to be able to look at the developed descriptor and determine what it is that they would need to do in order to become developed, and likewise step up to highly developed. And we look at this really as being more quadrants than grades. So we're looking at these levels as being more of a guidance to how well the student has achieved the learning outcome as to whether they have just managed to spit back some of the information that they read out of the textbook. This is an example from Marketing 220. So what we're doing here is we're using quantitative reasoning skills. So you know that that's going to line up to the quantitative reasoning ICC and PLO. And we've asked the student to compare different pricing strategies for profitability and differentiate them for use in pricing new product for new product marketing plan. And that is a course-long project that the students work on, doing one part of the project for each week. So the first thing, we broke the task down into exactly what the student has to do. This is a point at which you can provide templates for the student, you can provide examples for the student, really give them extremely explicit instructions on what you want them to do with this task. Everything that we can help the student to understand exactly what it is we're wanting them to do. We can't expect them to read our minds. And so the student you may even prompt them by asking specific questions that guide them in their thinking patterns about the task we want them to do. So this one asks the student to develop an Excel spreadsheet for the pricing model for their product, for their marketing plan. And this specific SLO, the discussion of that pricing model and developing that pricing model, includes a discussion of supply and demand, their pricing objective, the stages of the life cycle of their product, which of the basic approaches they used, and then whether they'll fine-tune the price with rebates, discounts, etc. Note that the legality or ethics has been removed from that, and that is because each SLO can only measure one thing. We do not want a bunch of variables in one SLO. We really need the student learning outcomes to be defined toward one core competency that the student is going to do with that SLO. So what I had to do in this particular case is I had to add another SLO for the ethics part of the question. It was one assignment. I asked the student to do it all in one assignment, but this is not in their proficiency descriptor, nor is it in the SLO. I created a separate SLO with ethics as the criteria for the proficiency descriptors, rather than trying to muddy the waters of the quantitative reasoning and add ethics to quantitative reasoning. So separate criteria for quantitative reasoning than for ethics, and so I broke it into two SLOs. Here we're back to the same example. So the highly developed is really very sophisticated. It uses that quantitative information in connection with the new product marketing plan. It's an effective format. The student really does have that deeper understanding of how they came up with their pricing strategy. They use that quantitative data and they can analyze it, they can apply it to the problem, and they make appropriate inferences. So stepping down from that just a little bit, at the developed level, they can convert the relevant information into an appropriate mathematical portrayal. They're essentially successful, and they show an understanding of pricing and its relationship to profit, but they may miss a part or two. At the emerging level, they attempted some calculations, or they might be incomplete. They are probably unsuccessful, or at least some of them are unsuccessful. They may not be able to connect that pricing to profitability. They're not able to effectively connect all the dots for the pricing decisions. And at the beginning level, they tried. They tried to explain a pricing model of a new product. They may or may not have used mathematical forms. They may have drawn incorrect conclusions. They can't really tie it all together. They don't know how the numbers affect a pricing model, nor do they know how it affects profitability. So using that step-down approach when we're creating those proficiency descriptors, highly developed really shows higher order critical thinking skills, multiple viewpoints, and their relationships. So they really can look at all the pieces, tie them together, put the puzzle together, and relay it to you. At the developed level, they may have a few minor areas. They've got some critical thinking skills. They look at several different viewpoints, but they may miss some when they're describing this to you. Then at the emerging level, they've got limited order, higher order thinking. They comprehend the learning concepts, but they really can't step outside of that and look at multiple viewpoints, tie those relationships together. Maybe they don't use any examples or evidence, and they may have several errors. Then down in that lower level quadrant of the students that are not doing so well achieving the learning outcomes, they've got limited knowledge of the subject matter and learning concepts, very few examples, very little evidence, and they may have multiple errors in their assignments. So other things that you need to know. A baseline framework is available. It's been aligned to the ICC and PLO map, but you do have to customize it for every single assignment and every single class. It's not universal to be used for every class in every circumstance. And again, if you would like to utilize some of the language from the value rubrics, you're more than welcome to do that. The baseline framework that we have has been cribbed, if you will, from the value rubrics. We've also developed the super SLOs, and those are going to be used across the curriculum to measure things like written communication, oral communication. We look for problem-solving skills in the sense of non-discrete problems, so showing critical thinking, and then discrete problem solving, which would be more like quantitative reasoning, but could also go to critical thinking. So we do have other tutorials on the Phase 2 developer kit, and we've talked about developing key graded assignments, but you don't have to worry really about, the for instance, APA citation in your proficiency descriptors for writing, because we now have a whole separate line item for a super SLO that would address APA citation and correct formatting, organization, and that kind of thing. So take a look at those super SLOs and you'll know that you don't really have to write your proficiency descriptors to address those particular things. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. We really need to get the phase 2 right. This is where we're headed for our future. It's good for us, it's good for our students, and it helps us to achieve our institutional effectiveness. My email is dsykes@allied.edu. My phone number is 570-939-0487. Thanks everybody, and have a great day.